Hello there, and welcome once again to Breakfast All Day. So fantastic to see you. I am Christy. For our first review this week, I could not be happier. My fantastic friend, who I love so dearly, Amy Nicholson, is here. She is a multimedia, multi talent, but she has a podcast called Zoom, and she writes for a scrappy, up and coming publication known as the New York Times.
My darling, hi.
Hi. I wish I could see you in person. I feel like it's been a while. How long has it been since I've seen you in person?
Too long.
I agree.
Even a day is too long, my love.
I agree. You are radiant as ever. And you're here to talk about Last Night in Soho with me, which you've seen twice now.
I have seen twice now. Yeah.
Why?
Well, I saw it almost 2 months ago. I think when they premiered it in Venice, they had a tiny screening here, and I was like, I will absolutely be there. Mm-hmm. And then they showed it again at the DGA this weekend with Edgar Wright in conversation with Phil Lord. And so I wanted to see what they were talking about, and I wanted to drag my boyfriend and make him watch it too, because he definitely wanted to see it.
Right. Cool. Well, let's talk about it. So here's what it's about. So Thomasin McKenzie is this innocent young woman full of enthusiasm, living in the country. And she has these dreams of going to London to study to become a fashion designer. She is obsessed with 60s London, a very specific place and time, swinging 60s London and all the chic mod style of it. And so she goes there to study to be a fashion designer. She takes a room in a house owned by Diana Rigg in her last performance. And when she goes to sleep at night, she has these really vivid dreams featuring an incredibly sexy and stylish and confident young woman played by Anya Taylor-Joy. Her name is Sandy. And Thomasin McKenzie's character's name is Eloise, or Ellie, as she goes by. And every night she has these dreams about Anya Taylor-Joy and her as a young woman in London trying to make her way as a singer. And the dreams become more vivid and more lurid. And then the dreams and the waking life blur into each other. And you don't know what's real, what's imagined. It's been established early on that Ellie has kind of a supernatural connection to the dead. Her mother has died. She can see her mother in mirrors and things. So we don't know whether this was ever a real person, whether it's just a vivid dream, because she's just so obsessed with this era. And it just keeps changing. Amy, what did you think of this movie?
Well, honestly, I think this is a movie where when it clicks, when like the tempo is all right, this movie is outstanding in parts. Like when this movie is about Thomasin's fascination with Anya Taylor-Joy, it just absolutely works. I mean, we have had those female friendships, right? Where you're like, I'm 18, I'm figuring out who I am. My friend is the coolest person on the planet. I hero worship you. And that's like, I think this really common emotion, definitely for girls, probably for guys. I haven't asked that many, I should, I'd like to know, where you're just obsessed with a person who's everything that you wish that you were. And I love seeing that represented in film. And I think the way that Edgar Wright shows that in film is just astonishing. Like he has all of this camera work when Ellie enters the dream world, where you're watching like Anya in real life down the stairs, followed by Thomasin in the mirror, just staring at her, like gawking at her. I know that's the shot that's in the trailer, but it's because it's so good. And watching them kind of blend together, merge together, all of that, I felt it the first time I watched this. I was like caught up in all of those emotions, so much that I forgave the fact that this film, when it makes a really dumb decision, it really makes a dumb decision.
Can you say what that dumb decision is without giving anything away?
I can say one dumb decision. Okay. I think it has several dumb decisions, right? I mean, right, when it's dumb, it's so dumb. You're like, oh, you're really close to perfection. I was upset. One of the dumb things that's introduced pretty early on is this like modern day character who's like a guy who goes to fashion school with Ellie, and he just absolutely like adores her and is always there for her, and he's just such a really badly written character that I felt sorry for the actor Michael Ajao who played him. He's just there to be like, I don't know, it's like a simpering almost 80s style character of like the perfect dream girlfriend who's just there for you no matter what, but it's like written as this guy, and it to me, I was like, every time that whole subplot showed up on screen, I was like, why are we even spending any time on this?
And he's Black, which kind of seems like he's there at her service in a way that's a little uncomfortable.
There is actually a little bit of that too.
Yeah.
He's somehow always magically there when she needs him, and he seems to have no needs of his own at
Right. He
all.
has no life of his own. Right. And what does she do for him besides like he thinks she's beautiful and interesting or whatever?
Exactly. And there's a hint of the fact that he might have a story to tell, because like Ellie herself, being like a country girl going to the city, which I think is another really relatable story idea. Like I moved from Oklahoma to come to LA. We all like all of us in LA have mostly come from less glamorous places. He's like, well, I'm from South London and it feels just as far away and crazy. And she's like, I don't really care. I have my own.
Right. And he alludes to the fact that like I feel like I don't fit in either.
Mhm.
And why is that? And how is that? And then you see him and he's ordering a bunch of beers at the bar for his mates. He's got friends. Anyway, yeah, it feels dashed off for sure. This is, as you mentioned, it's from Edgar Wright, and he co-wrote it with Krysty Wilson-Cairns, who wrote 1917. And Edgar Wright is such a master, or has been such a master of like blending genre, right? And like blending tone. All those Shaun of the Dead movies, that whole trilogy, they're such a fantastic standard for like how you make a parody of a genre or an homage to a genre that like slowly, steadily becomes a legitimate example of that genre itself, right? Shaun of the Dead is excellent and becomes like a legitimate zombie movie, and it's thrilling and terrifying. He's got a mixture of like nostalgic retro fashion show with like giallo horror, with there's a Me Too element to it as well, like a revenge fantasy element to it, and it all feels really ungainly. And as you mentioned off the top, it's thrilling off the top. Chung Hoon Chung is the DP. He is Park Chan Wook's DP. This is a gorgeous film.
Beautiful.
The lighting is like lurid in all the most perfect ways, and it's germane to what is happening here in terms of establishing mood, in terms of the setting. She happens to take this room where there's like a neon light that like alternates between red and white and blue outside of her bedroom as she's falling asleep, and it sets the tone perfectly for this dream world that she enters. And you're right, a lot of what they do with editing and with like special effects, with blending in like a dance sequence, like it's Anya Taylor-Joy, and then it's Thomasin McKenzie, and then it's back to Anya Taylor-Joy, and it's so seamless. It's just this whirlwind that you get swept up in, and you can see why she'd be fascinated by this person and by this life. And the clothes are fantastic. And Anya Taylor-Joy, like she already has these giant eyes, and then they gave her like, like swoopy cat eye eyeliner and like the bouffant, and she sings in this. I didn't realize until afterward that it was actually her singing. But and maybe it's intentional. I wonder what you think about this. There's not much to her though, beyond the idea of her. And maybe that's the point, that she just like stands for this larger notion of like idealized femininity and style for this shy, sheltered woman. What do you think about that?
I think that's true in that, yeah, like Ellie isn't being like, does she have sisters? Does she have brothers? Like, what's her family life like? She's just like, you look amazing. I mean, I think she stands in for this idea of idealized nostalgia. Yeah, that's the part of the film that I really enjoyed going on the current with Edgar with, because the movie opens and you're aware that Ellie is a girl who's like obsessed with nostalgia. All she listens to is like old classic records that belong to her grandmother. She wants to live in the past. And when you start this movie with her, you agree. You're like, yeah, the past is great, man. Like all your like hard drinking pub classmates in the modern world, your roommate Jocasta, they're like the worst. You are totally right. The 60s were the best. 60s London, like everybody knows that 60s London was probably the coolest place to be on earth if you could ever pick a decade. And he makes you feel that too. But then I think what the story is about is like nostalgia is toxic. Like if you're always dreaming of going back into the past, you're like letting the future slide. And the past was never as great as you imagine it to be. People in the past were also living hard lives, and we're like selectively picking and choosing the parts that make it seem like dreamy to us, that we want to imagine as how it was. And so I think what this film is saying about like having to let go of the past, you know, of like having to figure out what you can learn from it and apply to the present day is so much better than just trying to disappear into the past, which I think is, to me, that's kind of like a nice, bold step forward for Edgar Wright. I mean, he's one of our directors that I would have said, oh, they're so nostalgia obsessed. And here I think he's killing nostalgia. And I'm grateful for that.
Also, to tell a female-centric story is unusual for him. Yeah, I think what's happening in those dream sequences is sort of poking a hole in her idea of nostalgia when you see what life was really like for a woman like this back then and what it was okay to get away with, how it was okay to treat women back then. There is a sequence where Eloise is walking through this like downstairs corridor of a theater, and every dressing room, like something really harrowing or depraved is happening. And then he repeats that sequence. One of the main problems I have with this is that the imagery becomes so repetitive. And over again, Thomasin McKenzie is just stuck like running wide-eyed. And she runs to this door and it's locked. And she runs to that door and there's somebody blocking her. She runs down this hallway and people are there. And I don't want to say what it is that she keeps seeing, but she keeps seeing the same thing over and over again. And like the first time it was kind of creepy, but he does it about 10 times. And and the movie is almost 2 hours long. And I feel like he's padding it with that same kind of imagery that was shocking at first and becomes decreasingly so as it goes along. I get what he and his fellow screenwriter Christy Wilson-Cairns are trying to say about the treatment of women then and the perspective we have now, but like it just becomes kind of silly by the end.
Yeah, the thing that she sees is pretty dumb. It's dumb, to be honest. Like it's intellectually interesting, but the execution is just not good at all. And then I think for the audience, there's that question of like, is Edgar Wright the guy I want to be telling the story about the treatment of women? And I think that Edgar Wright is smart enough that he kind of knows that you don't trust him. There's a moment in the film where like he walks right up to the line where I was sitting there in the theater like, you're about to blow this. I can't believe you're about to blow this. And then he didn't, but he made me think he was going to. And that's such deliberate provocation that I kind of admire it, even though I was so mad I couldn't even relax. Even though he chose correctly. Do you know what I mean?
Can you in any way hint at what you're referring to without giving it away? Do you want to tell me later?
I think I'll tell you later, but I think when people watching this watch the movie, they'll probably know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But I mean, yeah, walking right up to the end. You have to at least say that like the men he cast as bad men from time in the past, time in the present, are pretty great at being evil. I mean, Terence Stamp walking around in the present day, Terence Stamp just looking like such a figure of evil anyways, and the way he kind of negs Ellie when he visits her in the pub. I mean, he is absolutely creepy. And then in the past to have like Matt Smith running around in Sandy's timeline. What did you think of these guys?
So Terence Stamp and Diana Rigg both bring like this legitimate, authentic 60s cool to it. And you can see why Edgar Wright would want to have them there. Yeah. I mean, Terence Stamp is like a little time capsule of everything that this movie is an homage to. And Diana Rigg, I mean, shit, she was Emma Peel. I mean, she was like, the original go-go boot wearing badass. And so if you can get her,
I think
fantastic.
The quote on the 60s is she doesn't remember any of it because she was living it.
and this is her last film, and it's dedicated, it says, for Diana at the beginning. So they fit in well as like the good parts of like the 60s nostalgia time capsule there. Terence Stamp adds a lot of cool and a lot of menace in just a few scenes there. But like over and over again, it becomes so repetitive that the stuff that seems kind of interesting at the beginning, fades as we go along, and it just keeps not ending. So
I think like if we were British, we'd probably get even more out of this, because I mean, Soho itself is such like a loaded neighborhood in England. It's always been kind of like the late night party neighborhood. It's always been the neighborhood where stuff goes down. It's the neighborhood that has the coolest things, but also had, it was the center of the red light district. So it's it always has that glamorous mix of something terrible is going to happen here, but we want to come back anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wishing like if that was filmed in, I don't even know what neighborhood in LA you'd film that in, but I could imagine it like transplanted here and me being like, yes, and like getting so many more layers out of it because you're fascinated with that neighborhood. I mean, Edgar Wright himself lives in Soho.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there is just this whole other British dimension that I'm not well versed enough in London enough to appreciate.
Well, there's a list on IndieWire today of 25 films that inspired this, or that there are like Easter eggs from in this. So that's a good little place to begin your groundwork. I know how research oriented you are, my friend. And so that's a good place to begin. Yeah, to get into his mind as to why this place and time matter. Anyway, what is your number, my friend?
You know, I wish I could say that I'm going to give half the scenes a 9 and half the scenes a 3. But since I can't do that, and because when it's a 9, it's such a great 9, I'm going to give it a 6.8.
Okay, I'm saying 6.2. Our number is a 6.5. Last Night in Soho is only in theaters if you want to watch it, and it's a fantastic, big, beautiful movie to watch. So if you want to go do that, go do that. You guys are wonderful. Amy, you are wonderful. I hope you will come back and hang out with me again. I really, really miss you. Hopefully I'll see you at a screening one of these days soon. Thank you.
I miss you, darling. Bye.
Mwah. And thanks for hanging out with us, you guys. We are at Be Fast All Day on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We have a little Patreon called patreon.com/Be Fast All Day. We are recapping the morning show, a very eventful episode of the morning show this week. Plus, our off the menu for this month is Raw, Julia Ducournau's debut film. Before she made Titan, she made Raw. And so that's one that you guys were lovely enough to pick for us to review. So Alonzo and I will do that. So come on back and join us and have a fantastic Halloween weekend. Bye.